Winter, February 1238. A Russian army is waiting for spring. The rivers are frozen, the forests are impassable, or so their commanders believe. Prince Yuri II of Vladimir has retreated north with everything that remains of the Rus military. He is waiting for reinforcements. He believes he has time. He is wrong. Subutai is already behind him, not approaching from the south where the roads are, not crossing the river where the crossing is obvious. Subutai has sent multiple columns through the forests that Yuri considered impassable, in temperatures that would have suspended the campaigns of any European army of the period, converging on Yuri's position from directions that Yuri never thought to defend because he never thought they were possible. The columns arrive simultaneously. The battle does not unfold. It collapses. Prince Yuri is killed within hours. The reinforcements he was waiting for never come. By the time they arrive, there is nothing left to reinforce. This is a single battle in a career that lasted 40 years. When historians name the greatest military commanders who ever lived, the list is predictable. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, Hannibal. These names appear in every textbook, every military academy syllabus, every ranked list published in every major Western outlet for the past 2 centuries. The debate is always about which of them deserves the top position. The name Subutai is not on that list. It should be the only one. 65 battles, 3 continents, 40 years, no defeats, not one. More territory conquered than any commander in recorded history. Campaigns that stretched from China to Poland, and from the frozen rivers of Russia to the deserts of Persia, from the mountains of the Caucasus to the plains of Hungary. He was the architect of the campaigns that built the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. He was documented by his contemporaries in Persian, Chinese, Arabic, and Mongolian. The evidence of what he did has never been in dispute. You were still never taught his name. That is not an oversight. It is a choice, made over centuries, by historians who decided that military genius had an address, and that address was Europe. This video is about the man they decided not to name, and it is about the specific, documented mechanism by which that decision was made. But first, we need to get to the man, because if you don't feel the reality of what Subutai actually did, the decisions he made, and the problems he solved, the specific and documented way his mind worked, then the argument about his erasure will remain abstract. It isn't abstract, but you have to see him first. Subutai was born sometime around 1175 in what is now Mongolia, into a family of blacksmiths. Not a noble family, not a warrior dynasty. His father made tools. There was no inheritance of rank, no family military tradition, no obvious path from that origin to supreme command of the most effective military force the world had ever produced. He entered Genghis Khan's service as a young man, reportedly as a companion to the Khan's sons. By his 20s, he was trusted with independent command. By his 40s, he had no equal, and by the time he died in 1248, at approximately 72 years old, of natural causes, on having survived every battle he ever entered, he had fought more campaigns in more theaters against more different enemies than any commander whose name we still remember. Think about what 40 years of active command actually means. Alexander the Great conducted campaigns for roughly 13 years. Caesar's field command spans perhaps a decade of serious operations. Napoleon, from his first Italian campaign in 1796 to Waterloo in 1815, covers 19 years, and his strategic thinking began to degrade long before the end. Subutai commanded at the highest level for more than twice as long as Napoleon. He did it not in one theater, not in one climate, not against one kind of opponent, but across the full geographic and military diversity of the Eurasian continent. What makes his record genuinely anomalous is not just the victories. It is the variety. Every serious military theorist understands that the conditions of war change radically with terrain, climate, culture, and the nature of the enemy. A commander who is brilliant in one context may fail completely in another. Napoleon's tactical genius for the controlled set-piece battle of Western Europe collapsed under the conditions of the Russian campaign. Alexander's cavalry tactics that shattered Persian armies were of limited use against the irregular mountain warfare of Bactria. These are not criticisms. They are documented observations about the limits of even the greatest commanders in the Western canon. Subutai faced every type of warfare the Eurasian continent offered: steppe cavalry engagements, mountain ambushes, siege operations against the fortified cities of northern China, winter campaigns through Russian forests, open field battles against the armored knights of Central Europe, river crossings, desert marches. He adapted every time. He won every time. If this is already rewriting something you thought you knew, stay with it, because we are only at the edge of what Subutai actually did. The further in we go, the more deliberate the absence becomes. In 1221, Genghis Khan gave Subutai and a fellow general named Jebe an assignment. They were sent to chase a defeated king. The Shah of Khwarezm had been overthrown. The Khan wanted him found, and he wanted intelligence on the western territories. The mission was a reconnaissance. What Subutai did with it was something else entirely. He and Jebe took a force of approximately 20,000 men and spent the next 2 years circumnavigating the Caspian Sea, a journey of roughly 8,000 miles through territories they had never seen, against armies that outnumbered them, with no supply lines, no maps, and no backup. They defeated Georgian cavalry at the Battle of the Kotman Plain. They drove into the Caucasus. They emerged north of the mountains and encountered a combined Cuman-Rus force of approximately 80,000 men at the Battle of the Kalka River. Subutai feigned a retreat that drew the Rus cavalry forward and away from their infantry, then turned and destroyed each element in sequence. The Rus commanders who survived described the battle to their contemporaries as something they had never encountered and could not explain. They were not wrong that it was unlike anything they knew. They were wrong about why. When Subutai returned to Mongolia and reported what he had found, it was not the report of a scout. The military historian Richard Gabriel, in his 2004 study Subutai the Valiant, characterized it as the most complete strategic assessment ever produced by a reconnaissance operation in recorded military history. Subutai came back with detailed knowledge of every army, every political alliance, every river crossing, and every geographic corridor between Mongolia and Poland. He had not just traveled the distance, he had tested every obstacle he would later need to destroy. The campaigns that followed were not improvised responses to opportunity. They were executed against a map Subutai had already drawn in his head. And this is the thing that Western military history consistently fails to account for. Subutai was not a cavalryman with good instincts and a fast horse. He was a strategic architect who planned campaigns the way a master chess player plans positions. Not the next move, but the state of the board 10 moves from now. His intelligence networks were institutionalized. His operational planning incorporated political and logistical factors that European commanders of the same period rarely considered systematically. The historians and scholars who studied the Mongol campaigns were not watching instinct in motion. They were watching a mind at work. Which brings us to how he actually fought. Because the tactics Subutai used are the same tactics that military theorists would later study, reverse engineer, and attribute to everyone except him. Most armies in the medieval period met at the front. Lines formed, lines advanced, lines collided. The side with more discipline or more numbers or more luck at the critical moment won. Subutai refused that battle. When he faced an enemy that wanted to fight on a line, he avoided the line entirely. He maneuvered, sometimes for weeks, sometimes across hundreds of miles, until the enemy's position was untenable not because of what was happening at the front, but because of what was happening everywhere else. By the time his enemies saw him, they were already surrounded. The Sit River in February 1238, where we began, is the clearest example of this at a tactical level, but the same logic operated at a strategic level across entire campaigns. In the Western campaigns of the 1230s and 1240s, Subutai identified the political fractures between the Rus principalities and exploited them before a single battle was fought. He moved against each principality in sequence, preventing them from consolidating, destroying each one before the others could respond. He understood that the real battlefield was not the ground his army stood on. It was the alliance structure of his enemies. Destroy the alliance before the battle, and the battle was already won. The historian Timothy May, in his 2012 study, The Mongol Conquests in World History, made an observation worth stating precisely. He noted that Subutai's operational method, widely dispersed columns converging simultaneously on a single strategic objective, predated what European military theorists would later call maneuver warfare by roughly 6 centuries. In the German concept of Bewegungskrieg, the Soviet doctrine of deep battle, the modern operational art that governs how major military powers plan large-scale campaigns today. All of it. 6 centuries earlier, one man. He is not credited for this in any standard military curriculum. The doctrine exists. The lineage is not traced back to its origin. We will return to why that is, but first, 1241. If you want the single clearest demonstration of Subutai's mind at its full operational range, it is the European campaign of 1241. Because in 1241, Subutai fought the most sophisticated armies Europe could produce on their own terrain, with every defensive advantage a defender typically holds. And what he did to them revealed a level of strategic planning that contemporary European military thought could not recognize because it had no framework for it. By 1241, Subutai knew everything he needed to know. He had already destroyed the Rus principalities. He had broken the Cuman steppe federation that served as the buffer between the Mongol advance and Central Europe. And through his intelligence network, a system of scouts, informants, merchants, and captured documents more sophisticated than anything operating in the West at the time, he had a complete picture of European political geography. He knew that Poland and Hungary shared a border, but not an alliance. He knew that Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II was locked in a dispute with Pope Gregory IX and would not mobilize in time. He knew the approximate strength and positioning of every major army between him and the Atlantic, and he knew exactly what to do with that knowledge. The 1241 campaign opened on two axes simultaneously. A northern force under General Bidar crossed into Poland. Subutai took the southern force into Hungary. The Carpathian Mountains separated the two forces. They would not see each other again until after the campaign was over. That was the plan. Two armies, two theaters, zero communication, coordinated by a plan that Subutai had designed before either force set out. In Poland, Bidar's forces met the combined armies of Poland and the Teutonic Knights at Legnica on April 9, 1241. The European force was commanded by Henry II of Silesia, one of the most experienced military leaders in the region. Backed by the full weight of the crusading military tradition, knights in plate, disciplined infantry, the standard instruments of European warfare at its most capable. Bidar defeated Henry's army entirely. Henry was killed. His head was paraded before the remaining fortifications. 2 days later, Subutai destroyed the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi. Let that land for a moment. 2 different armies, 2 different commanders, 2 different countries separated by a mountain range, both destroyed within 48 hours of each other, with enough coordination between the attacking forces to prevent either European army from reinforcing the other. The timing was not coincidence. The separation of the European forces was not luck. Subutai had planned both battles before either one was fought. This is not cavalry instinct. When this is operational planning, that European military doctrine would not theorize, let alone execute, for 3 more centuries. The historian Denis Sinor, writing in 1999, reviewed European accounts of the 1241 campaign and documented something telling. Contemporary European chroniclers consistently described the Mongol forces as barbaric and savage, language that signaled something animalistic, something without intelligence at its core. Sinor argued that this framing was not a description of what the Europeans had actually observed. It was a response to what they could not explain. They had been beaten by tactics they had no framework to understand, and calling the enemy savage was easier and safer than admitting they had just been outthought. That framing entered European historiography in 1241. It never fully left. Well, now you know what the man did, so let's be precise about why you were never told his name. The mechanism of Subutai's erasure is not a burned library or a colonial conference. It is something more durable, the deliberate construction of a Western military canon that defined genius by European example, and treated everything outside that example as instinct, numbers, or luck, rather than intellect and planning. The construction happened in stages. In the 18th and 19th centuries, European military academies systematized the study of military history for the first time. Saint-Cyr in France, Sandhurst in Britain, West Point in the United States. The curricula they built drew on ancient Greek and Roman commanders, on Marlborough and Frederick the Great, and above all, on Napoleon. These were the models, and these were the standard against which military thinking was measured. When Mongol campaigns appeared in this literature at all, they appeared as examples of speed, numbers, and ferocity, not of planning, not of intelligence, not of the kind of long-range strategic calculation that the academies themselves taught as the mark of the truly great commander. The military historian John Franz, in his 2015 analysis Western Warfare in the Age of the Crusades, noted something specific and damning. The tactical methods Subutai used, feigned retreat, converging envelopment, deception-based operational planning, were observed by European chroniclers at the time they occurred. The tactics were documented. They were then attributed over subsequent centuries to the general Mongol style rather than to any individual. The strategist was dissolved into the horde. A European commander who used feigned retreat was called a tactician. A Mongol commander who used feigned retreat was described as cunning. The same decision, the same action, different categories of human being. The tactic stayed. The name disappeared. I want to be precise about what that means. This was not a conspiracy. There was no room where European historians sat down and agreed to erase Subutai. The mechanism was more routine than that, and in some ways more resistant to correction because of it. It was a framework, a set of assumptions about whose decisions counted as intellectual, whose intuition counted as strategy, whose victories counted as achievements of mind rather than accidents of circumstance. Those assumptions shaped what was written. What was written shaped what was taught. What was taught became what you encountered in school and took to be complete. So let's correct the record. The consequence of this absence is not only about historical justice, though it is about that. It has distorted the actual intellectual genealogy of modern warfare. In the early 20th century, a group of military theorists in Britain, Germany, and the Soviet Union developed what they believed was a revolutionary new approach to large-scale military operations. J.F.C. Fuller and Basil Liddell Hart in Britain, Heinz Guderian in Germany, Mikhail Tukhachevsky in the Soviet Union. Their central idea: instead of attacking an enemy's front, use mobile armored forces to bypass it, strike deep into the enemy's rear, collapse the logistical and command structure, and bring the entire strategic position down before the frontline forces even know what has happened. Guderian called it Bewegungskrieg. Tukhachevsky called it deep battle. The world came to call it Blitzkrieg. It remade the second half of the 20th century and is the foundation of how major military powers plan operations today. What those theorists were doing, and Robert Doughty, in his 1985 study Seeds of Disaster, identified this with a scholar's careful precision, was rediscovering a tradition. They cited their precedents: Hannibal at Cannae, the cavalry maneuvers of Charles Martel, Alexander's flanking operations, but the most complete and documented precedent for everything they were theorizing was not cited: the campaigns of 1241, the Sid River, the Kalka River, with Subutai's coordinated multi-axis envelopment of Poland and Hungary, conducted simultaneously with separated forces across mountain terrain, timed to prevent mutual reinforcement, was a more precise operational execution of deep battle theory than anything Guderian would achieve in 1940. They studied what he did. They just didn't say his name. What remains of Subutai? More than you might expect, because the sources that buried him are European, and the sources that documented him are not. The Persian historian Juvaini, writing in the 1250s, just years after Subutai's death, produced detailed accounts of the Mongol campaigns with specific operational orders, troop dispositions, and named commanders. Subutai is named repeatedly, with direct attribution for the campaigns he designed. The Chinese dynastic records, the Yuan Shi, compiled in the 14th century, contain multiple chapters on Subutai's biography, covering his campaigns in sequence, naming the armies he defeated and the strategies he used. These are primary sources of genuine quality. They exist. They have been available to Western scholars for over a century. And then there is the secret history of the Mongols. The earliest surviving account in the Mongolian language of Genghis Khan's empire. The scholar Paul Kahn, in his 1984 translation, identified Subutai as one of the 4 supreme commanders explicitly named and praised by Genghis Khan himself. The document describes Subutai's qualities in specific terms. Not ferocity, not speed. The quality named is something closer to strategic foresight, the ability to see the shape of a campaign before it happens. The documentation has always existed. What was missing was not evidence. What was missing was willingness to let a Mongolian blacksmith's son sit at the top of the list. That absence has a cost that extends into the present in ways that are concrete and measurable. In 2004, the U.S. Army's School of Advanced Military Studies conducted a curriculum review that assessed historical case studies used in professional military education. The Mongol campaigns appeared. Subutai's name did not. The campaigns were studied for what they demonstrated about operational principles. The man who designed those principles was not credited for them. The lesson was taken. The source remained anonymous. Think about what that means. Military officers in the 21st century are studying operational concepts that a Mongolian general perfected in the 13th century. Without his name, without the lineage, without understanding that the tradition they are learning has a specific origin, and that origin is not European. The intellectual heritage of modern warfare has a gap in it. The gap has a name. Military history, as it is typically taught, is not a comprehensive account of who commanded most effectively. It is an editorial project with a defined aesthetic. That aesthetic values European commanders, European theaters, European tactical traditions. It treats the world outside Europe as a source of enemies rather than a source of ideas. And when a Mongolian general develops operational concepts that European theorists would later independently reconstruct and call revolutionary, the history books do not say, "Here is where this tradition begins." They say, "Here is where this tradition begins," and point to a German officer writing in 1937, "You were taught a list. Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon. You were taught that these names represent the outer limit of what military command can achieve." That claim is not based on a comprehensive reading of the historical record. It is based on a European editorial project that has been running for 2 centuries and has remained largely invisible because it presented itself as objectivity. Subutai fought 65 battles. He won 65 battles. He adapted to every terrain, every climate, every type of opponent the Eurasian continent could produce. He planned campaigns years in advance and executed them with a precision that 20th century theorists would struggle to match with radio communication, aerial reconnaissance, and unmotorized logistics. He was documented by Persian historians, Chinese dynastic scribes, Mongolian court chroniclers, and reluctantly by European observers who watched him defeat their best armies and described him as savage because they had no other word for what they had just seen. If you want to subscribe to a history channel that keeps looking for the names they left out of the list, this is it. Every video on this channel exists to find those gaps, document what fell into them, and refuse to let the absence stand unchallenged. What else is missing from the list? Tell me in the comments. Be specific. A name, a civilization, a battle, a story. Because the next video I make might be the one you mention. Now, the next video on this channel is about a city that educated 25,000 students at a time when Oxford had not yet been founded, and about the specific day its libraries were destroyed. And by whom? and why that story never reached your classroom. The record is incomplete. We keep correcting it.